Welcome to the Dennis Report. I'm Dennis Atchison. New Brunswick is on the cusp of a change. There are people in this province who have a vision and have the energy to create change that benefits all of us. Did you ever think about the amount of money that could be saved if buildings were more efficient, and where that money could go instead of into the air as lost energy? Do you know that we've got people in this province who know how to take a building, convert it, and make it good for the entire community, and that you can be investing in it? Today we're going to hear one of the better solutions we have for making New Brunswick better. We're here today with Amit, Virmani, and Peter Corbyn from Naveco Corporation.
Naveco Power.
Naveco Power. And welcome, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going to explore some interesting stuff in the relationship between the economy and the environment, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
So why don't we start with the easy stuff and give us the 30-second version of Naveco Power, because it's something new?
It is very new. Well, the basis behind the concept, not so much. We are becoming New Brunswick's first community investment fund. So that's what's happening. It's utilizing the same concept that has been applied in Nova Scotia for the last 16 years,
Okay.
raising community capital for community projects,
Okay.
and it's only now coming to New Brunswick. So have you by any chance driven past Amherst on the way to Halifax?
Not lately.
Not lately,
It's been
but
about 8 years or so.
But probably 8 years ago, you may have noticed the wind turbines were there at that point in time.
Yeah.
Those are all owned by folks in the local community.
Okay.
So that same concept is now in New Brunswick. So someone could put in $1,000 to $250,000 in a given year, receive a 50% personal income tax credit, and the funds are now going towards a renewable energy or energy efficiency project. And that's what we do. So we're starting small by doing a building retrofit here in Fredericton, and then looking at, in the future, what can we do in terms of community-owned renewable energy, such as community-owned wind or community-owned a solar farm, maybe.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Stuff you want to add to that?
That's a pretty good start. Pretty good start. Really, because of the introduction of this financing model called the Community Economic Development Corporation as of April 1st in New Brunswick, April 1st, 2016, like Amit says, it gives New Brunswickers the opportunity to invest locally in projects that make sense, and money has to be invested locally. So we're starting with an energy efficiency project on a building here in Fredericton, and hopefully we'll be building some renewable energy projects, either wind and or solar, in the province in the coming years.
Great. About 100 things pop to mind right away. One is New Brunswick's mythology is we have no money. But we also know that we have lots of money here, don't we? Mm-hmm. So have you been able to sort of identify that? It's always one of those quirks. New Brunswick will act as if it's a have-not, but you know, the revenue from Atlantic Lottery is always astronomical, and
Right.
the revenue from the casino is astronomical, and
Well,
a whole bit around angel investors, and take your pick on which pot. You know?
I'd like to start this conversation with a basic foundation of that fallacy.
Good.
Although these CEDCs are not RRSP eligible yet, our intention is for them to be so in the future. But here's a number that you would find probably staggering, is that New Brunswickers invest about $700 million a year in RRSPs. Only 2% of that stays in the province.
Yep.
So we invest $700 million, $14 million stays in the province. What we would like to do is to at least double that number over the next couple of years.
Yep. Interesting. RSPs or pension funds, trying to get at those. In one of my past lives, doing stuff at a fairly large union, doing some research for them and finding out that 0.02% of investments from pension funds goes into R&D for green technologies, and this was 10 or 12 years ago. It's
Right.
like, why aren't we putting our money where we already know where the breakthrough is going to come at some point? So you're up into that pattern of the investors looking for a certain return on their investment, and there's an element of risk to it. To going into this, so you must have mitigated some of the risk, which we need to hear about.
Most definitely.
Yes, definitely. Go ahead.
Specific with our first project, we're seeing to it, we're mitigating risks by choosing a project site with long-term tenants in it, such as the Federal Court of Canada and Service New Brunswick, which have been in the building for the last 25 plus years. Okay. And choosing a project site where there is a lot of good that can be done in terms of energy efficiency by reducing its greenhouse gas footprint by over 50%. So we're talking about the equivalent of taking 35 to 40 cars off the road through this $1 million retrofit. So any projects that are chosen as a community investment fund, we are always vetting it and seeing to it that the independent board of directors that we have as well are looking at what is in the best interest of the community to make sure that it is a successful project.
Other thoughts? Because let's play with the money side for a bit, and then
Right.
we'll get to the application side, like how you're going to make that happen.
In
But
what
the money,
respect? The money side?
the money side, yeah.
Yeah, so the energy retrofit of this building in Fredericton, 320 Queen Street or Westmoreland Place, it is, the investment is in making the building more energy efficient. And using a financial model that's been in place for about 25 or 30 years, it's called an energy performance contract, where basically the building owner realizes a reduction in their energy cost.
Yep.
And then they pay for the contract through the savings. So essentially, in most of these contracts, what happens is they come out cash flow positive or even neutral, so that it doesn't actually cost them any additional money. So they pay for the financing through the savings of the energy cost. So in North America, there are about $4.5 to $5 billion worth of these deals done a year in large commercial and industrial buildings. So the business model there, the revenue model is there. And like Amit said, with the long-term tenants that this particular building has, the risk is substantially mitigated because of those tenants, anchor tenants. So it's from a risk perspective, it's not like going on an IT Twitter, Snapchat or whatever. It's a true bricks and mortar opportunity for virtually every New Brunswicker to be able to invest in and see a return from.
That makes me think of infrastructure spending, because the federal government currently is talking a lot in the start of their second year of their mandate on infrastructure spending. They'll have to start spending it by the third year federally. So does one meet the other to a degree? I know it's different pools of money, but I'm thinking more of the mindset that we need to do things in a different way. And we've got all the resources we need. We just need to accept this has to come together in a different way now.
I don't think it's so much that we need to accept it. The acceptance is already there.
Okay.
7 in 10 New Brunswickers want to see something done about climate change. And this is a proven fact with many surveys that have been conducted in this province. 8 in 10 want to see more investment in renewable energy. So it's not so much acceptance. The problem has been with communication.
Okay.
All right, so we are still the last rural province in all of Canada. So our needs, our concerns as a province differ from an urban landscape such as Toronto. Accordingly, for New Brunswickers, the concern is, does it make economic sense? Because a lot of folks are concerned about what am I going to do for my next paycheck, living paycheck to paycheck and things of that sort. And environmentalism is second. So a concept of this could be sold purely on the environmental or social benefits in an urban landscape like Toronto. But here the communication has to start with that, yes, this is a profitable project. And by the way, the wonderful bonus about it is that there is also conservation attached to it. It's, people want to do this. They just don't know how to go about doing it at this point in time, because the messaging has always been about very much the environment, and no one really talks about the fact that it's not just that this is environmentally conscious, but this is extremely profitable for the community to do, that there is an economic argument to be made towards getting into renewable energy or energy efficiency without being concerned about a need of a subsidy to make the industry survive or to profit and thrive in this province.
Does that get you past that bump on the issue of scale? A lot of times when talking about carbon capture or carbon reduction or the Paris Accord, and then you look at Canada's contribution to all of that for our CO2 contribution, and then you look at New Brunswick's contribution within Canada, some people will diminish the argument to say, well, we're so small, who cares? Does this help offset that because you've taken a different road or you've found a complementary road? Like, you should care anyway, it doesn't matter the scale.
Right.
There's that issue, but they don't want to accept that argument. They say, we're so insignificant, it doesn't matter.
There's 7.5 billion people on the planet.
Yeah.
And everyone has a role to play.
Yeah.
And they is us. right?
Yeah, that's it.
And we as Canadians have, I think we're number 2 or 3 in the world on our carbon footprint per capita.
Okay.
A couple of Middle East countries are way off the scale because of the oil production, but you know, Canada, US, we're 22, 23 tons a year of carbon emissions, right? Where a lot of developing nations are 1 or 2. So it's got to start somewhere. Just the argument that we're a small place.
Yeah.
Everyone can use the same argument, right?
Yeah.
But the collective is what's really important.
Yeah, it's the spirit of it more than the technical elements or detail.
Absolutely.
It also sounds like, yet again, New Brunswick is positioned to make a leap forward where everyone else has got a whole lot of machinery, whether it's bureaucratic or technical infrastructure machinery, they need to convert. So does our scale work to our advantage so that we can kind of leapfrog 20 years and already be in 2020, but by 2018 doing this sort of thing?
I think this does. So let's think about Ontario for a second. If you want to speak to a minister to find out more about what can be done in the community, how you can help and things of that sort, you're going to wait months on end to get an appointment. In New Brunswick, we pick up the phone, right, and we say that we need to speak to a deputy minister, we need to speak to a minister, we want to talk about how do we make our community better, right? How do we take care of our province, not just for ourselves, but our kids, our grandkids, okay, and leaving it in a better place than where we are today, a prosperous place. And we're able to do that. So by being a smaller province, and this has been proven before, we were the first province to go entirely digital when it came to telecom by setting up fiber op across the province. Same with IPTV and many other innovations in telecom. We were the test bed for the rest of the country, and it's precisely that reason. We're smaller. Everything that is being tested here is scalable, but by virtue of having smaller bureaucracy, a smaller, more integrated government that is very much close to the citizenry, you're able to have those more touch points where you can have those discussions formally, informally, generate ideas, and be able to move forward and advance the economy, to advance this province.
So let's talk about the building maybe, or the application, because we've kind of touched on, we have access, we've got skill sets, we have pools of money that we think we have. Squirrel moment a little bit. I had privilege of being in the Economic Summit in 2010 and down at the Beau Séjour in Moncton. There was 200 and some odd people. The Business New Brunswick bunch had pulled us all together, Business Council New Brunswick. So you had all the big players in the province. They brought in Don Drummond to do the sermon from the pulpit about what New Brunswick needs to do. Interestingly, of the 12 things that came out of that 2-day summit, 9 of them would involve more government, even though the intent from the business community was how to reduce government impact. But one of them was, and I'm always curious if it actually took root, was that New Brunswickers need to start investing more in New Brunswick companies and businesses, which ties very much to where you guys are coming from. So have you found that's happening? Because that was 2010, so that's 6 years ago. And supposedly that's the very room would know how to do that because the people in the room had those resources.
I feel the framework has been created to some degree, and now it is up to us as the business community, or just community investors at large, to see to it that that now thrives. Because before, investing locally as an opportunity was only open to 2 or 3% of the province, either an accredited investor, by that which means someone of a very high net worth, or someone who is friends and family of the local startup or the local company. Those would be the only individuals allowed to invest in that company. So now what's happening with this community investment model, or the Community Economic Development Corporation, the CEDC, it's not so much a new corporation as it is a new way to raise capital. So this is, in one sense, a mini IPO, or similar to a stock. You're given a prospectus. With an IPO of a stock, it's usually about 500 pages, something about yay thick, that you would read through to see and figure out all the transparent facts of where is the money going, how's the money being raised, what is the project that it's going to be applied to. In New Brunswick, through the Financial and Securities Commission, as of April the 1st, with the creation of the CEDC model, we're putting out a mini version of that prospectus, which would be approximately 50 pages inside, and again details who sits on the board, who is the management company, where are the funds going, how is the project going to make money. And by virtue of being transparent in this nature, these opportunities will no longer be available just to 2 or 3% of the population, but it's an opportunity available to all New Brunswickers across this province who wish to invest locally, right here in their own backyard.
So that would be from people, right? Your investors would be people.
Yes.
Correct.
A household market is what I'm thinking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Any potential from pension funds?
I think so.
Working on that.
Yeah.
Okay, are there legal obstacles or legislated obstacles?
Not
or-
necessarily legal obstacles as much as the opportunity for a tax credit. So as an individual, excuse me, this structure allows for 50% tax credit out of the gate with an investment for an individual. If I'm not mistaken, that's not true of a pension fund at this point in time.
It would be 15% for a corporate entity, 1.5.
Right.
Yeah.
But as an individual, it's still 50%.
Okay, so you're feeling your first touch and your biggest reach will be at that individual level,
Yes.
as long as people are aware of it.
Correct. And as we build on that success, we would obviously like to cast a wider net, but also cast a wider net with respect to the regulations that would facilitate this being able to grow. Yeah.
Okay, so let's explore the building side or the nuts and bolts pieces. When you were on the show before, you had some lovely stories about helping a company be more efficient, and then that met an environmental standard for a large distributor that would have, or a retailer that would have helped them. So, these guys, by being more efficient in the factory here, reduced their CO2 footprint there, which then allowed them to sell their stuff to, I think it was Walmart or one of the big ones.
Good example, yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
so it
That's right.
fit a certain model.
Yeah.
And that stuff will never make it on a product label because it's just too much information, but it's a great behavior. You're going to reduce the scale to New Brunswick scale. So for instance, is it the Service New Brunswick building here, and you mentioned one other one?
That's
and then,
correct.
And then the vision of where that, once those are planted, where does it go from there?
So this is the first of many projects that we see happening here in this province, and it is essentially to prove this model.
Yeah.
So what we're looking to do in terms of, like you said, the nuts and bolts, is to become the very first LEED Gold existing building in all of New Brunswick, second only to Purdy's Wharf in all of Atlantic Canada.
Okay.
So by that, what we mean is here locally in Fredericton, Chancery Place as well as the Convention Centre are LEED Silver buildings. And that is an environmental designation of how efficient the design is and environmentally friendly it is. With an existing building or a retrofit, it's not just one time that you receive the designation. There's actually a measurement and verification component forcing us every 5 years to recertify and always reach for the newer standard. So it's continuous improvement that is happening here.
On an older building?
On an older building.
Okay.
All right, and with this building, so the specific energy reduction measures we are contemplating and are intending to move forward with is to take all of the old T12 fluorescents, so the tubes that are about 1.5 inches wide, and turning that all into LED troffers throughout the building,
Okay.
increasing insulation to the roof,
Okay.
changing out all of the motors in the building for circulating the radiant hot water for heating to what are known as variable frequency drives,
Okay.
changing the heating and ventilation unit on the rooftop to a new, more efficient version of a 60-ton rooftop unit, plus further additional measures such as changing the hot water heater from a standard electric domestic hot water heater to a heat pump version. So there's at least 10 or 12 major retrofit measures that are not just contemplated, but are actually actionable and are intended as part of this $1 million retrofit to be a leader, to be a model here in New Brunswick of what can be done. The greatest issue being faced here, and what people don't know, is if you, just looking at the downtown core as a microcosm of Fredericton, of the 15 Class A buildings located in the downtown core, only 2 remain locally owned. So we're seeing to it one of those 2 buildings is going to be championing that very essence of the importance of greening their presence, becoming more efficient, and doing it in an economical manner. Ross Ventures has done this before by winning the Premier's Award, I believe, back in 2014, by becoming the most efficient building at that point in time with their retrofit. And we're seeing to it that we supersede even what they were able to come up with at that point in time and take it to the next level, especially as technology has further innovated, costs have come down, more knowledge has been gained in terms of installation and best practices.
Did you catch all that? Yeah. My goodness. It's awesome. It's because people need to hear this. And part of me wants to go back and break down some of the little bits so that the audience understands some of the elements. So they've got a cartoon picture or a graphic moving in their head as you described. So if we could explore one of those.
Definitely.
It was the water one. Can you say, well, the building's built like this and the pipes are like that, and then we take this unit out and we put this unit in? And
so if you're familiar with the radiator that you usually have under your window for a hot water radiant heater in an old house,
yes.
right? that's what this building is heated by, is that it has a bunch of radiators going all the way around the outside perimeter of the building. And for flowing all that water through, in old buildings, it used to be a motor or a pump that would continuously run at the same speed all the time, no matter if you needed additional flow of hot water to heat the building or not.
Yep.
So by changing it to a variable frequency drive, you can speed up or slow down the rate of that water moving through a standard radiator or water heater throughout the building. And that would help modulate in terms of the heating or cooling of the building, and you're saving energy that way.
So I just flashed something. There'll be an awful lot of people watching the show who work in buildings that are closed systems. And it'll be July, and they'll be wearing a big woolly sweater because they're frozen.
Right.
Because for some reason the system keeps it at 60 or 65 Fahrenheit, or what's that, 14, 16 or so centigrade. And then in the wintertime, they'll be walking around in t-shirts because they're cooking. So there seems to be some dissonance between the inside of the building's environment and the outside of the building's environment and change.
So which is why
Does that modify that?
It does help modify that, and that's part of the building management system, the new system that is being installed. One of the techniques that can be used is something known as demand ventilation. Okay. So what that means is by installing a few occupancy sensors and CO2 sensors throughout the building, if somebody leaves their office for a half hour, let's say, the system can turn off the lights in that room, reduce the heating and ventilation only that room, so that way it's not overheating or overcooling the entire building, but just heating and cooling as necessary in the areas where there are people. So you reduce consumption of energy, you're heating it to a temperature where people are more comfortable, because the system will increase or decrease the amount of heat or cooling output based on where people are located by automatically closing the vents to those areas where people are currently not seated or currently not working. So if you have to heat or cool the entire building and all of the vents, it's almost like if you've got vents around your house in each individual room. If all of them are open, you have to put a lot of airflow throughout the building to make sure that every place is heated or cooled equally. But if you can automatically close or limit the amount of airflow to areas where it's not needed, then you're putting less stress on your motors and you're requiring less heating or cooling, thus dumping in less excess energy into that building, which is why people tend to walk around in t-shirts, during the winter, or as you're saying, in parkas in the middle of summer. So through this technique known as demand ventilation, it reduces that happening and increases the comfort of folks in the building. I
think a good analogy of that, excuse me, the residential level is, like Amit said, we in North America, a lot of us have central air, so it's the same temperature in the whole house, right? Yep. In Europe, their homes are smaller, and they have doors between the rooms, right? And the comfortable air follows them around the house, so there's no need to keep an entire home, or say 2,000 square feet at 20, 21 degrees Celsius, where you're only in maybe 200 square feet at a given time. Yep. Just share quickly, Amit and I, back in May, we had the opportunity to tour a bunch of smart grid focused businesses in Germany. Yep. Excuse me, with a number of other people from around Fredericton and Brunswick. And what was kind of interesting is that, number one, we learned that in Germany, the cost of electricity there is about 2 to 2.5 times more than what we pay. But a typical home's electricity bill is the same as ours. They're using about 2 to 2.5 times less energy than we are in our homes. Yep. But the other thing, even in the office buildings we were in and the businesses, there were some rooms we were in where no energy was being consumed. They had windows that actually opened, and what a concept, eh? Letting natural air come into a room. Yeah. So lots of windows, natural air coming in, no AC blowing because the windows could open, and the lights were off. So probably 5 or 6 of these rooms we were in, there was no energy being consumed in these rooms at all. Zero.
Yep. It's many times we can go past buildings and think, just open the window. Even though the building's not designed with windows you can open, or you see all the little air conditioners crammed in. The old MB Power building downtown Fredericton's an example. On one side you see about 15 air conditioners. The window beside it can open though. And I don't know what the building temperature was inside, but outside it was about 12 or 14 degrees and they had air conditioners running. Right. So they just opened the window. That's been a lost art somehow. And once in a while in the Facebook world or social media world, you'll see a post whistle through about how they built houses 150, 200 years ago. And the flow of the air through the room and zones and stuff. It's like we're almost getting back to that again.
Yeah.
You know, and that the human can lift a window if it's too warm or drop it if it's too cold and just control it that way. But with the new buildings and being able to go in and retrofit a building, because we can't change all that
That's
infrastructure.
correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and the thought that it's New Brunswick owned, that's fascinating. Quickly, we have about a minute or two before break. Do you have some early bites, some early nibbles about this looks like a great idea, how do we help you get to the next step?
From other potential investors, or you're talking about other potential projects?
Both.
Both?
Wherever you want to go.
We did our first launch event of this community investment fund and informing people of what is about to up and come around the corner on November the 8th of this year. I'm getting ahead of myself here. And at that point in time, we had already had investors interested and had pre-committed 20% of that $1 million before doing even the launch.
Okay.
After leaving that event, and the people that were in that room, they're listening to this, and we had a very large turnout who came out very interested in what's going on. That increased by an additional $100,000.
Good.
So we've already closed, we're talking about just by holding 2 events, 30% of what's necessary to do this first project. And this is before the official 90-day window from the securities regulator to start raising that capital. This is just an early expressions of interest of people who are interested in putting the money in before taking that capital. So we already have great fervor here in the community wanting to be part of this future vision of a prosperous New Brunswick where we get to invest locally and actually get to see the differences that are being made.
Great. Want to add to that?
And they did well.
Okay, well, we'll take a short pause here. So we'll be right back after a couple of community announcements. We're here with Amit Virmani and Peter Corbyn from Naveco. I'm going to blow the end of it again. I want to say corporation all the time. Naveco Power.
Yeah.
In between the lines of what you guys have described, because you're trying to do something new and break new turf, apply technology in a new way, and build a new culture in a way. New Brunswick isn't always known for wanting to innovate and wanting to be new, do new. So can you speak to a little bit to not really the challenges, but the fact that if we could just let go of the way we've always done things and to take on doing things in a new way,
Right.
that we could really fly?
Well, I think what's interesting with this is to sort of counter that a little bit. This is innovative,
Yeah.
but the building blocks for it really are not
Okay.
innovative. In one aspect, from an investment perspective, really what this new regulation has allowed is for more New Brunswickers to be involved in being able to invest. So you could go out tomorrow and buy one Apple stock for, say, $600, or you could buy some Naveco stock, but that stock stays local as opposed to going to California.
Yep.
So really the regulation from the government has made facilitating an investment in a local entity possible. So kudos to the government for creating a foundation for that to happen. So really not that innovative, but that's okay. Really not innovative is actually working on buildings to make them more energy efficient. That's been in place since buildings have been around,
Yep.
so not really that innovative. The other thing that hasn't been that innovative for about the last 25 years is the way in which building retrofits, energy retrofits, are financed through this energy performance contract model, where essentially the building owner pays for the savings out of the energy they save. So you've got a regulation in place. You've got buildings becoming more energy efficient anyway, and also the financing structure with which to do that. So on their own, really 3 independent stools, or sorry, legs of a stool really,
Yep.
that without having looked at each other would not be that innovative. I think what the innovation here is that we've brought those 3 together. There's the innovation, is taking 3 silos.
Yep.
What a concept, eh? Taking silos and putting them together.
Converging it, yeah.
Converging the silos. So I think that's where the real innovation is here. And I think it's good that those three silos have come together, because it really does give the business model a solid foundation for future investment and opportunities in that respect. So I'd say the innovation is bringing silos together in this particular case.
Right at the local level.
Yeah, at the local level, absolutely.
What was that about the RFP at Gagetown or across the Army bases that was put out recently?
Oh yeah, earlier this year, late last year, for example, DND, Department of National Defense, put out about $100 million contract for doing this type of financing of energy retrofit projects across the country, as an example. But
and this would be the second or third time that Gagetown would be going through it, I believe?
yeah, so Gagetown's a very efficient base. I've been through this process, so
Okay.
so none of the silos are new. Just putting them together is new in the context of local economic development.
Wonderful. And so many people need to hear this, because we can province, and instead of the stuff we can't do. I remember when I first moved here, I was always told from a local usually that you got to go away to be an expert. And so if you go away and you have success, you come back, then it'll all work for you. If you try to nurture it here, it's going to be a tougher challenge. But that was the 80s.
We've both been away.
Yeah.
And come back.
Yeah. But there's a whole theme for that too. There's a skill set here that's quite phenomenal that's going
absolutely.
on. So it's how do we get at some of the systemic change like you've just explained. So you've got one example of a flagship project with doing the Service New Brunswick building. Do you have...
and the Federal Court building, we should say. So Federal Court of Canada and corporate headquarters of Service New Brunswick and Interactive Computer Systems are the primary tenants of that building.
All right, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the crystal ball world, it's 4 or 5 years from now, this thing took root and people got it.
Yep.
They started to invest locally, just like buying locally. Where does it go? Like, what does it look like? Does it make its way to all those flat roofs that you see when you fly into the Toronto airport when you land all the time? Or does it make its way through New Brunswick so that our small market and our power generation is offset by bigger efficiency in all of the buildings that we have, because there's a different culture now and it trickles its way into households? Yeah.
Well, go ahead.
The cheapest form of generation is what you don't generate.
There you go.
So there is a concept called a negawatt instead of a megawatt. So instead of generating additional electricity, the cheapest form of electricity is the conservation. So it's everything you needed to learn, you learned in kindergarten.
Yeah.
Waste not, want not. And that's really what this principle is.
Sure, we
right?
do it with food. We waste 40% of our food, for
Right.
example.
And that's what increases cost. So waste not, want not also applies to electricity, the use of energy, both heat as well as what we use for powering our electronics and the things we use in our lives. So first and foremost, you reduce your consumption. That's the cheapest form of seeing to it that your electricity costs stay down. And then from there, you look at bringing on renewable forms of energy, of what remains of what you actually need to generate.
Building on that local theme, though, so energy is one aspect. So we, depending on where you live and such, you pay a few $1,000s a year for your energy bill, right?
Yep.
So that if you look at your wallet and what comes in a month and what goes out in a month, energy is a substantial portion of that.
Yep.
But one of the things that we're trying to get across from a messaging perspective is think of your entire life in that context. So, for example, who holds your mortgage? Is that money staying in the province with a credit union, or is it going to Bay Street, right? Your investments, are they going to Bay Street, or are they staying in the province?
Yep.
Your entertainment, are you drinking beer from elsewhere, or
Yep.
enjoying some of the multiple microbreweries now in New Brunswick?
Yep.
Where do you donate your time or volunteer your time? So if you look at it in that context, how much of our life and literally what we spend could be spent within the province versus actually leaving the province. And specific to an energy perspective, one of the metrics or one of the sort of information or data that's now being collected by a lot of municipalities and jurisdictions in North America is how much of that energy spend stays in your province or your city. So, for example, I can't remember who it was the other day, but we were at a presentation and found out
Schumann's you're talking
Michael
about?
Schumann's, yeah.
Yes.
But so, for example, I think London, Ontario was one example that was used. Only 12% of the energy that people in London, Ontario spend stays in the city. So if you look at it in that context, if you look at it from a community perspective even, down the road, you're saying, what happens 4 or 5 years from now? Not only energy efficiency is money that's saved and can be spent back in your local community, but also how much of that energy can be produced in your community itself. One example that I heard last week was in Fredericton, roughly, if you've got 13,000 cars, and all those cars improved their fuel efficiency by 10% or drove 10% less, that would free up $5.2 million in the local economy. Believe it, as an example, right? So like Amit said with megawatts, that money you don't spend in energy is money that could be invested elsewhere in the local economy and not going somewhere else.
So let us imagine here for a second, we've got lots of buildings that are owned by government in New Brunswick, Department of Education. Let's imagine for a second if parent-teacher groups were getting together, raising community capital, private funds, the same way that back in the 1800s they'd raise a barn, right?
Yep.
To put up renewable energy up on the rooftop of the high school, so solar panels, or changing out all the fluorescents to LED. Imagine the money that is now being spent in the local economy, first for doing the retrofit, but second to that, all of the energy savings. So that's dollars no longer spent for keeping the lights on, but dollars that go back into healthcare, dollars that go back into education for students. So it's very much achievable to reduce the government of New Brunswick's electricity bill by approximately 20% through some very simple energy efficiency measures, especially if the financing of it is done by the community itself, right? Instead of having to borrow from larger banks, but the community comes in and says, we will finance these deals, we will see to it that we receive a return. Imagine that all of those savings are now then being put back into the different government services. So we talk about, needing more money to run different departments.
Yeah.
The money's right there, and a lot of it comes from just seeing to it that we work towards making things more efficient in how they operate. So similarly enough, it's not just renewable energy that we're talking about and using this financing mechanism. It can be used for many different ways for reducing greenhouse gas emissions, such as maybe partnering up with a local community here. Michael Brown actually touched on it in his first State of the City address last night, and he's very interested and has created the mayor's task force on homelessness. And as part of his speech last night, he recognized us, Naveco Power, about what we're doing related to community investment in renewable energy. But that same model can also apply to developing new affordable housing here in the community that is profitable for the investor, that is economical as well for ownership, and also is very efficient and reducing our carbon footprint at the same time. So you're not only seeing to it the community profits from investing into making these projects happen, but also that there is a reduction in our effects to climate change. And the mayor specifically spoke about this, that there's nothing wrong with community-owned or private development still in one sense, right? Turning a profit, because no one is willing to do anything for free, not even the government of New Brunswick will build stuff for free. It'll be less of a profit, he said, potentially, slightly, than other projects, but there is nothing wrong with the developer turning a profit. In this case, citizens in New Brunswick who would be investing for doing a community good, such as building more affordable housing, helping end homelessness. So where we see this, not just Peter and I, but the rest of our team, as well as our board of directors who are supportive of this initiative, is that this financing tool can be used for spurring on the New Brunswick economy and reducing greenhouse gases at the same time directly, be it through new builds of new homes, new buildings, of retrofits of old buildings, developing renewable energy through solar, through wind, through hydro. There are many different ways. Or what's stopping us from starting an electric vehicle car sharing service down the road? We'll save that not for today, right? Let's start with one small project and work from there. But
it's good to plant where potential it could go.
Exactly. Owned by New Brunswickers for New Brunswickers.
Yep. So many thoughts flooding through. Soundbite from a food conversation with Amanda Wildman and Ted Wiggins of the Farmers Union in New Brunswick. Very similar to what you just did. If New Brunswickers would spend $13 a week on local projects instead of the big food chain stuff which is bought from California or from other markets, it would have an impact of $100 million.
Wow.
for over the
immense.
year for the province and for local farmers. So she didn't say, this isn't new spending. We're not asking you to spend 13%
Absolutely.
more. It's
Shift,
the
shift
same.
your spend.
Yes, and that's the same principle that you spoke to, that it's already there. We just need to realign it a different way.
Right.
It also gets into a little more, and to me it's exciting. It's closed loop thinking. So one of the narratives that you're working against to a degree, but it sounds like you're making some headway, is that the economy we tend to think of today is, oh, we got to support business, and then business creates taxes, and taxes go to pay for social services. Very linear. But it isn't how it works in real life. There is a three-dimensional network that's moving all the time that is community. So one always supports the other, always supports the other. When it gets out of balance, then that linear thinking struggles or hurts the balance. So when you talked about the investment, it could be owned this way, it could be owned this way, meaning it could be government that institutes it, or it could be a not-for-profit model, or it could be a for-profit model. Because the premise was different, is that this goes around in a full circle. So factor in all of the things you use.
I wouldn't say we're changing that linear model. This is just support of that linear model, actually.
Well, I want to
So-
get rid of the linear model.
No. But what I'm saying is that
Because it isn't real. It's more than just support business in order to create tax base. Because a healthy community isn't going to be achieved through a linear model. It'll be achieved through what you are working on.
let's go back to the tax credit for 1 second here. That tax credit exists only for for-profit business. So as part of what's written in the Small Business Investor Tax Credit Act, that this is utilizing and is opening up to all New Brunswickers, you must be a for-profit business. So that's why I'm saying we're not changing the linear model. We're just bringing to the forefront what any smart small business has done here in the community. It's just before, people wouldn't talk about what they were doing. So if you look at any small business here in the community, all right, and some of them are now larger businesses, the Clarks, the O'Learys, okay, even my family's business, Dad started Interacting Computer Systems 40 years ago. It's all about local job growth, giving back mentorship to those employees, seeing to it that you're supporting the local charities, supporting the local hospital, supporting the local Y. It's just, you wouldn't toot your own horn in that way in one sense, right? Okay, and sometimes what gets forgotten, okay, especially when a business entity is no longer has roots in a small local community and forgets that sometimes because they've gotten so large as a machine, is the importance of that circulation within the local economy. So I'd still say it's still very much linear. All that's happening here is we're coming back to our roots in one sense of what was the economic heartbeat and what has always been the economic heartbeat of New Brunswick or all of Canada or the world in that matter. It's spending dollars locally, reinvesting the local economy, local business owners, all right, because they are citizens themselves, are attached to that. So it's not even let's talking about taxes or things of that nature. It's just, it comes back to taking care of your own, right? And it's like you're saying, it's talking about charity, and charity begins at home. It's reconnecting in one sense. It's allowing more New Brunswickers to help start those small businesses, create, maintain those economic models of circulating within, right? So that's why I get a little, you could say, off-puttish of where we talk about that we're challenging an old model, where really we are just the further innovation of the old model and reconnecting with our roots of being community-minded. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Because
and
people
it
get
was-
scared of when we talk about being a wholesale change.
Yeah, and
right?
I was trying to factor the audience in mind, because there'll be some in the audience who go, one of New Brunswick's narratives is from government make sure you give money to business because we have to create jobs. The current government has that as one of their mantras, right? But there's the other narrative of all the money that gets wasted because
large
it doesn't
corporate
generate.
jobs,
Yeah,
right?
I'm literally and figuratively sitting between the two of you right now.
Yeah, but it's okay to wander into this. It's
Yes.
important.
So from a system perspective and linear perspective, I think that it's important that as a system, we are all part of that system, right? And part of that system includes a number of, quite frankly, small, discrete elements, right? And I think what the opportunity is with this new financial structure, known as the CEDC, it allows for small private sector businesses to be able to help accelerate those within the system that is what New Brunswick or even Fredericton is, right? That said, we live, quite frankly, in a global economy. We can only take advantage of what we can do here realistically. So, for example, the example you used about $13 on your groceries having a $100 million impact on the local economy. In reality, we're not going to build cars here. We're not going to build dishwashers here, right? So that's part of the global ecosystem now, right? But how can we look at and impact positively the local ecosystem, which is food, right? Which is investment, which is in helping our communities thrive more, and that can be done with local dollars, right? I mean, for example, Amit and I, we eat out a lot, lunch every day with someone somewhere, all downtown. We make sure, well, because most restaurants downtown are locally owned anyway, but we always do eat at local restaurants, right? So that's a choice that we've made. Besides, the food's great as well, right? But so if you look at the system locally or globally, what can we do to help local? Because even though we are Canadians, even though we're New Brunswickers, we all live in Fredericton, right? So that's this local an impact that we can have, hopefully, but knowing that we're New Brunswickers second and Canadians third. So.
And same for St. John, Moncton,
Absolutely.
Bathurst, Miramichi.
Absolutely.
And I'd like to add a grace note to that, because to me that isn't protectionist. We're going to go through a lot of that from the United States now that they've gone through their election, about circling the wagons and make America great again and bringing industry back. And the new president's probably going to learn that it's so integrated now on manufacturing, for electronics especially is one example, vehicles would be another one, that it's you need to identify the things that you've got control over locally and then nurse that, because that becomes your strength. Another past guest, Peter Linfield, 2-3 years ago, talked about some industries we need to sunset so that we can make some space for the new things that will come up, which sounds like where you guys fit in, literally. And there's another thing about money, just a quirky discussion about money, because money is an energy form. It's supposed to flow. But the Occupy movement taught us 5-6 years ago that money is being stuck. It's being stockpiled. There's piles of it offshore. All those stories that come through the media about tax evasion. And so there was a study in Portland, Maine about the impact of the big box stores and the amount of money stays in the community and how much leaves the community. Something like 85 to 90% of the money left the community compared to when you bought local.
Right.
So they started a whole campaign, even though the town gave permission for building all the box stores on the outside of town, just like most communities do.
Well, there's actually a study going on right now, sorry to interrupt, going on right now with some economists looking at the effect or impact of being more local in Atlantic Canada. That'll be released soon, but as an example, a lot of this work is happening now looking at the impact of buying local. Actually, one example is restaurants, and I don't remember the exact number, but essentially if you were to go to a chain restaurant in Phoenix or Vancouver or Fredericton, you're right, that leaves the town. Where depending on the jurisdiction, it can recirculate back in the local community 2 to 3 to 4 times.
Depending on each specific city, but Harvard Business Review has done these studies and has actually mentioned these studies in a number of their different papers and different articles, speaking to about 10 or 15 different American cities that have specifically been analyzed, that for each dollar that is spent locally at a local store versus the franchise of some sort, that dollar, precisely as Peter's saying, recirculates 2, 3, to up to 4.5 times more when spent at a local store versus spending it at some sort of chain store or at a franchise type establishment. And that similar study is going to be done for specific cities and sectors here in Atlantic Canada to prove what are the specific numbers for our jurisdictions.
Do you think we're on the verge of a new definition of success?
Yes. No hesitation there. Absolutely.
Yeah,
I think that one simple, there are two things that in my personal opinion, I'm not an economist by trade, I'm just an engineer, but the two...
says that on your diploma, just an engineer.
Just an engineer. Just an engineer. But I think one is, the Occupy movement, it was what it was, but I think the the global awareness of the concentration of wealth
Yes.
is quite raised, and I think that that does have to change. One of the coefficients, I guess it's out, it's called the Gini coefficient, or the Gini coefficient. To me, it's the most fascinating number out there, and it's a measure of the distribution of wealth in any given country. So, for example, you take a country like Sweden or Norway or Finland, where where you've got, say, an average GDP per capita of $50,000. You've also got the same average GDP per capita in somewhere like Saudi Arabia. Where in reality, in Finland or Denmark or Sweden or Norway, the range around that $50,000 is fairly narrow, right? But if you look at a country like in the Middle East, you've got an average of $50,000, but you've got 90% of the population making $2 an hour, and 2% of the population, billionaires, right? So I think there's a global awareness that that's changing. So to answer your question around definition of success, I think that will play into the future of mankind, because we have to. This top 1% thing is just. I don't think that's progress, quite frankly. So I think that's a really important one.
So what I love about this is that Peter and I can respectfully disagree on different topics about economics at times, and this was also proven through here in New Brunswick in the legislature when we spoke at the Select Committee of Climate Change. There are different political parties in this province, and yet the Progressive Conservatives, the Liberals, and the Greens, all part of that committee, unanimously supported what we had to say about investing locally, right? So sure, there's bipartisan support here in this province of what is being done in terms of investing locally. So we may differ in terms of what we believe about how the economy works or what type of economic models may work, Keynesian or looking at Austrian economics or things of that sort. But at the end of the day, everybody understands the importance of supporting small business, investing locally, helping with entrepreneurship and creation of more jobs here locally. That not government creating it, or not the case of, that from far and away some corporate entity is going to do it, but locals on the ground are the ones who are going to create jobs. And that's the best part about this, is that no matter what background you come from or what your beliefs are about economics, this is one thing that everyone can agree on, is that there's great value in supporting a local economy and doing it in an efficient and economical manner.
But to agree with Amit, it's inclusive.
Exactly.
It's inclusive. It's inclusive.
And
it opens up the ability to invest in local success to virtually everyone, as opposed to the top few percent. So
the threshold used to be you had to have millions of dollars. That's very true. Okay, to be able. So what there are things that we agree on. There are things we don't agree on. But this is true. Is that it used to be limited to a very select portion of the population. Not because of those rich people, though. I will blame government on that one. Okay. In terms of allowing only a select audience to be able to invest in local ventures by having a certain income threshold. With this offering document, you can put in, as I was saying previously, as little as $1,000 towards an initiative locally, but it's not sight unseen money either. And this is where that balance in government, as well as the rest of citizenry and private business, comes in by having the framework. There is a document that allows for transparency, so you know where, if you wish to invest as little as $1,000, if that's all you are able to, but you're still contributing to your local economy because you believe in it, where is that money going? How is it going to be used? How is there going to be a return? How is it going to help New Brunswick?
Perfect spot for us to end.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. You've wandered our audience into an important area. You're breaking new ground with it. And thanks for taking the time for being here today.
Thank you for having us.
Appreciate it.
As always, thanks for watching. Be good, have fun, and love each other.